The Stratford Tower did not sleep. It merely held its breath. At 3 a.m., the 40-story monolith of steel and glass rising from the center of Chicago stood like a lighthouse in a sea of darkness, its upper floors piercing the heavy fog rolling off the lake. While the city below was a chaotic tapestry of neon lights and late-night taxis, the interior of the tower was a vacuum of silence. It was a world of polished marble, low-humming ventilation, and shadows that stretched long and thin across the empty corridors. For Eliza, this silence was both a sanctuary and a prison. Eliza was 23, but her soul felt seasoned by a lifetime of winters. She was a member of the night crew, the invisible workforce that arrived when the executives left, tasked with erasing the evidence of the day. She wore a gray uniform that was 2 sizes too big, a deliberate choice to hide her frame, just as she kept her gaze lowered to hide her eyes the color of amber, intelligent and perpetually guarded. She moved through the building with the practiced stealth of a ghost. She emptied bins, polished mahogany tables, and watered the orchids that lined the executive suites, leaving no trace of her presence other than the scent of lemon oil and the restored order of the room. She preferred the night. The darkness felt safer than the exposing glare of the sun. In the daylight, she was Eliza the dropout, the girl who couldn't afford her rent, the daughter of a mother who had vanished and a father who had forgotten her. But here, in the quiet, she was the queen of an empty kingdom. She could pretend that the silence was peace, not loneliness. She could pretend that she wasn't just surviving, but living. The night does not hide the truth. It simply waits for the noise to stop, so we can finally hear it. That particular Thursday, the rain was lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 40th floor, the CEO's private domain. The storm was violent, a drumroll against the glass that echoed the turmoil Eliza felt in her own chest. She had received a final notice on her apartment door that morning. Eviction was no longer a threat, it was a promise. She pushed her cleaning cart over the plush carpet, the wheels making a soft whoosh sound, trying to focus on the task at hand rather than the crushing reality waiting for her at clock out. She entered the main executive lounge, a cavernous room designed to intimidate. Leather sofas, abstract art worth millions, and a view of a city that made humans look like ants. It was usually empty at this hour. The CEO, Nolan Stratford, was a myth to the night staff. They whispered about him in the break room, the billionaire prodigy who had taken over the family empire at 30, a man known for his ruthless business acumen and his tragic, solitary existence. Rumor had it he hadn't smiled since his wife died 3 years ago. Rumor had it he lived in the office because he couldn't bear the silence of his own home. Eliza didn't care about rumors. She cared about finishing her shift. She began to wipe down the long, obsidian conference table, her movements rhythmic and soothing. The storm outside flashed, illuminating the room in a strobe of blue-white light. In that brief flash, she saw something on the side table near the window. A chess set. It was an exquisite, hand-carved marble set, the game mid-play. Eliza paused. She shouldn't touch it. Rule number 1, do not disturb the personal items. But she couldn't help herself. She had learned chess from her grandfather before he passed, the only person who had ever told her she was smart. She looked at the board. White was in a precarious position, seemingly trapped. But Eliza saw the opening. If White sacrificed the knight, the queen would be free. Without thinking, driven by a ghost of a memory, she reached out. Her rough, work-worn fingers hovered over the cold marble piece. She moved the white knight, capturing a pawn, opening the board. I didn't see that move. The voice came from the shadows of a high-backed winged chair in the corner, deep and resonant, like gravel moving underwater. Eliza gasped, spinning around, her hand flying to her chest. She knocked over her bottle of cleaner, which hit the carpet with a muffled thud. Nolan Stratford sat in the dark. He hadn't turned on a single lamp. He was just a silhouette against the storm, holding a tumbler of amber liquid that he hadn't drunk. He leaned forward, the lightning catching the sharp angles of his face, a strong jaw, a brow furrowed in perpetual thought, and eyes that were dark, intense, and startlingly weary. I am so sorry, sir," Eliza stammered, backing away, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "I didn't know anyone was here. I was just cleaning." "You weren't cleaning," Nolan said. He stood up. He was tall, imposing, filling the room with a sudden, suffocating pressure. He didn't look angry. He looked awake. For the first time in a long time, he walked over to the chessboard, ignoring her terrified retreat. He looked down at the move she had made. "You sacrificed the knight," he murmured, tracing the piece she had moved. "To save the queen." "It was the only way to break the stalemate," Eliza whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Nolan turned his head slowly to look at her. He took in the oversized uniform, the fraying sneakers, the way she clutched her cleaning rag like a shield. He lived in a world of Harvard graduates and corporate sharks who couldn't see 3 moves ahead. And here, in the dead of night, a girl who scrubbed his floors had just solved a puzzle he had been staring at for hours. "Who are you?" Nolan asked. It wasn't a demand for her badge number. It was a genuine question, heavy with a curiosity that unsettled him. "I'm just the night staff, Mr. Stratford," Eliza said, lowering her eyes, desperate to become invisible again. "I'm nobody." "Nobody finds the solution that quickly," Nolan countered. He stepped closer, stepping into her personal space. The scent of rain and expensive scotch washed over her. "What is your name?" "Eliza," she breathed. "Eliza," he repeated. The name sounded foreign in the sterile office, too soft, too real. He looked at her, and for a second, the storm outside seemed to pause. He saw the fatigue in her posture, the fear in her amber eyes, but underneath it, he saw a spark of intelligence that his world usually crushed. And Eliza, looking up at the billionaire everyone feared, didn't see a monster. She saw a man who was just as lonely as she was, sitting in the dark, waiting for someone to make a move. "You should go, Eliza," Nolan said softly, his voice rough, "before I ask you to stay and finish the game." Eliza nodded, turning to flee, her heart racing. She grabbed her cart and rushed for the door. But as she stepped into the hallway, leaving the man alone in his tower, she realized something that terrified her more than eviction. He hadn't dismissed her. He had challenged her. And for the first time in years, she wanted to play. The game had begun, and she had no idea that she had just made the opening move in a match that would cost them both everything. For 7 nights, the chessboard on the 40th floor became a silent battleground, a secret conversation composed of marble and strategy. Eliza would enter the office with her heart caught in her throat, pushing her cleaning cart over the plush carpet, her eyes immediately darting to the side table. Every night, without fail, a piece had moved. A black bishop cutting across the diagonal, a rook fortifying the defense. Nolan was playing her. And for the first time in her life, Eliza felt like she was being spoken to in a language she actually understood. She would make her move quickly, her rough fingers lingering for a split second on the cold stone of the pieces, imagining the warmth of a hand that had touched them before her. She never saw him during this week. The office was empty, the leather chair vacant. But his presence was heavy in the room, a lingering scent of cedarwood and solitude that clung to the air like smoke. We speak most honestly when we think no one is listening. On the 8th night, the routine broke. The storm had passed, leaving Chicago wrapped in a wet, bone-chilling fog that pressed against the glass of the tower. Eliza entered the executive suite, prepared to make her move, a daring advance with her queen. But as she rounded the corner of the massive mahogany desk, she stopped dead. Nolan was there. He wasn't sitting in the shadows this time. He was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, his forehead resting against the glass, looking down at the invisible city below. He had shed his suit jacket. His white shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that looked tense, corded with the strain of holding up the sky. He looked exhausted, a titan worn down by the weight of his own empire. Eliza gripped the handle of her cart, the wheels squeaking softly on the floor. I can come back, Mr. Stratford." Nolan turned. His movement was slow, deliberate. When his dark eyes locked onto hers, the air in the room seemed to thin, making it hard to breathe. He didn't look annoyed. He looked relieved. "Don't go," Nolan said, his voice low and gravelly. "Please." He walked over to the seating area, bypassing the chess set entirely. On the low coffee table, amidst the stacks of financial reports and legal briefs, sat 2 porcelain plates covered with silver cloches. "You work a 10-hour shift," Nolan stated, sitting down on the leather sofa and gesturing to the empty spot across from him. "And according to the security logs, you haven't taken a break since you swiped in at 6. Sit." Eliza hesitated. Every instinct she had honed for survival told her to run. This was a violation of the natural order. Cleaners didn't sit with CEOs. Ghosts didn't dine with kings. "I can't, sir," she whispered, clutching her uniform as if it were armor. "I have 3 floors left to finish. If the supervisor checks the cameras in this office are off," Nolan interrupted gently. "I turned them off an hour ago." "Sit, Eliza." She sat. She perched on the edge of the velvet armchair, feeling small and out of place, conscious of her scuffed sneakers against the expensive rug. Nolan lifted the cloches. Underneath were 2 simple, hot meals, roasted chicken, vegetables, warm bread. The smell hit Eliza with a physical force. She hadn't eaten a proper meal in 2 days, surviving on vending machine crackers and anxiety. "Why?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Because I hate eating alone," Nolan lied. He picked up his fork, not looking at her, giving her the dignity of privacy. "And because you are the only person in this building who knows that a night is worth sacrificing." They ate in a silence that was terrifyingly intimate. Outside, the wind howled around the glass tower, but inside, the only sounds were the clinking of silverware and the soft hum of the ventilation. Eliza ate slowly, savoring the warmth, while Nolan barely touched his food. He watched her. He watched the way she tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear, the way her hands, reddened by harsh chemicals and cold water, held the fork with a delicate grace that contradicted her station. "You don't belong here, Eliza," Nolan said suddenly. Eliza froze, the bread turning to ash in her mouth. She lowered her fork, shame flushing her cheeks. "I know, sir. I'm sorry. I'm just the help." "That's not what I meant," Nolan corrected her, his gaze intense. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, closing the distance between them. "I mean you don't belong in the shadows. I've seen your eyes when you look at the board. You have a mind that burns. Why are you pushing a cart?" "Because minds don't pay rent, Mr. Stratford," Eliza replied, a spark of defiance lighting her amber eyes. "And burning doesn't keep you warm when the eviction notice is stapled to your door." The mention of the eviction hung between them. Nolan's expression darkened, a flicker of pain crossing his features. He looked at the luxury surrounding them, the art, the marble, the waste, and then at the girl who was fighting just to exist. The contrast was a physical sickness in his gut. "I could change that," Nolan said softly. "I could write a check right now that would solve everything." "I don't want your charity," Eliza said, standing up abruptly. Her pride was the only thing she had left, and she held on to it with a desperate grip. "I didn't play the game for money. I played because for 10 minutes a night, I wasn't just the girl who cleans up your trash." Nolan stood up too, towering over her. The tension in the room shifted, turning from social awkwardness to something electric, dangerous. He stepped closer, invading her personal space. He reached out, his hand hovering near her face, terrified to touch her but unable to pull away. "You are not the girl who cleans up my trash," Nolan whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "You are the only thing in this tower that is real. Everyone else wants something from me, Eliza. They want the name, the access, the power. You just wanted to play." He looked at her lips, then up to her eyes. The urge to kiss her was overwhelming, a tidal wave crashing against the walls of his discipline. Eliza held her breath, mesmerized by the sadness and the heat in his gaze. For a second, the class divide didn't exist. There was no billionaire, no cleaner. Just a man and a woman suspended in the sky. The higher you climb, the harder it is to breathe. But the world has a way of crashing into the quiet places. The heavy double doors of the office swung open without a knock. "Nolan?" "Security said the sensors were off. I was worried you had." A woman strode into the room. She was sleek, polished, and terrifyingly beautiful, dressed in a trench coat that cost more than Eliza's life earnings. This was Sylvia, Nolan's sister-in-law and the chairwoman of the board, a woman who guarded the Stratford legacy with a razor blade. Sylvia stopped dead. Her eyes swept the scene, the dim lighting, the intimate dinner setup, and Eliza standing inches from Nolan, looking flushed and guilty. The silence that followed was suffocating. "I see," Sylvia said, her voice dripping with ice. She didn't look at Nolan. She looked at Eliza, dissecting her with a single, contemptuous glance. The uniform, the shoes, the audacity. "I didn't realize we were running a soup kitchen in the executive suite, Nolan." Nolan stepped back, putting distance between himself and Eliza, the mask of the CEO slamming back into place out of necessity. "Sylvia, you should have knocked. And you should have better judgment," Sylvia snapped. She walked over to the desk, placing her designer bag on it with a sharp thud. "The board is convening in the morning to discuss the merger. I came to prep you, but it seems you are distracted by the housekeeping." She turned to Eliza. "You can go. Take the trash with you." Eliza felt the slap of the words physically. She looked at Nolan, waiting for him to defend her, waiting for him to say she wasn't trash. But Nolan stood frozen, his jaw clenched, his eyes fixed on the floor. He was paralyzed by the sudden intrusion of his reality, by the shame of being caught in a moment of vulnerability, and by the fear that defending Eliza would only paint a target on her back. He said nothing. Eliza's heart shattered quietly. She grabbed her card, her hand shaking violently. "Yes, ma'am," she whispered. She hurried past Sylvia, past Nolan, and out the door. She didn't look back. She couldn't bear to see the man who had just looked at her with such longing now standing silent while she was erased. The elevator ride down to the lobby felt like a descent into hell. She had flown too close to the sun, and now she was falling back to the cold, hard earth where she belonged. The game was over. The silence of the Stratford Tower had changed texture. Before, it was a peaceful void, a blank canvas where Eliza could project her dreams. Now, it was heavy, suffocating, and filled with the ghosts of things unsaid. For 3 nights, Eliza avoided the 40th floor. She traded shifts with a confused coworker, taking the basement levels, scrubbing concrete floors where the air smelled of damp earth and exhaust fumes. She told herself she was hiding to keep her job. In reality, she was hiding to keep her heart from breaking further. She tried to forget the look in Nolan's eyes. She tried to forget the warmth of the dinner and the terrifying closeness of his hand. But memory is a cruel architect. It builds monuments to the moments we are most desperate to demolish. Hope is a feather that breaks your back when it finally falls. On Friday night, the summons came. It wasn't a request to finish a chess game. It was a cold, administrative command delivered by the building manager. Report to the Human Resources Suite. Immediately, Eliza walked the long, sterile hallway on the 10th floor. Her stomach twisted into knots. She clutched her cleaning rag like a talisman, her knuckles white. When she entered the glass-walled office, she didn't find the HR director. She found Sylvia, Nolan's sister-in-law stood by the window, silhouetted against the city lights like a jagged shard of ice. She turned as Eliza entered, her face composed into a mask of faux sympathy that was far more terrifying than her anger. On the desk between them lay a single, crisp envelope. "Eliza," Sylvia said, her voice smooth as polished steel. "Thank you for coming. Please, leave the cart outside. We don't want to dirty the carpet." Eliza left the cart. She stood before the desk, feeling smaller and shabbier than she ever had in her life. Is Mr. Stratford here?" Eliza asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Nolan." Sylvia let out a short, soft laugh. "Oh, dear. Nolan is preparing for the merger announcement. He doesn't handle personnel issues. That's why he has me." Sylvia picked up the envelope. She tapped it rhythmically against her palm. "We've been reviewing the security footage, Eliza. The unauthorized breaks. The use of executive facilities. The fraternization." Sylvia paused, letting the word hang in the air like a dirty accusation. "Nolan was quite embarrassed when I showed him the logs. He realized he had let things get out of hand. He's a kind man, Eliza. Too kind. He tends to pick up strays, feed them once, and then forget they don't belong indoors. A lie dressed in truth is the deadliest weapon of all." Eliza felt the blood drain from her face. Strays. Is that what she was? A charity case he had entertained for a week to alleviate his boredom? "He didn't say that," Eliza whispered, her voice shaking. "He told me. He told you what you needed to hear to make him feel benevolent," Sylvia cut in, her eyes hard. "Nolan is a man of the world, Eliza. You are, well, look at you. Did you honestly think he saw you as an equal? Or did he see you as a novelty, a distraction from his grief?" Sylvia slid the envelope across the desk. "This is a severance package. It's generous, extremely generous. Enough to clear your debts, I imagine. Nolan signed off on it personally this morning. He wants you to have a fresh start. Somewhere else." Eliza stared at the envelope. Nolan signed off. The betrayal hit her with the force of a physical blow. He hadn't just stayed silent in the office. He had actively authorized her removal. He had looked at the chessboard, remembered their game, and then signed a check to make her disappear. The connection she had felt, the spark he had spoken of, it was all a game to him. And she was just a pawn he was sacrificing to save his king. She reached out with trembling fingers and opened the envelope. Inside was a check for $10,000 and a termination notice. At the bottom of the notice, in distinct, sharp ink, was his signature, Nolan Stratford. It was real. Eliza looked up at Sylvia. She saw the triumph in the other woman's eyes, the cold satisfaction of a problem solved. "Take it," Sylvia urged. "It's more money than you'll see in a decade. Go back to your life, Eliza. Let the people who own the tower run it." Eliza looked at the check. It was freedom. It was rent for a year. It was food. It was everything she desperately needed. But as she held it, she felt a burning sensation in her chest, a fire fueled by dignity and heartbreak. If she took the money, she was agreeing with them. She was admitting she was a stray, a mistake, a transaction. Some prices are too high, even for the desperate. Slowly, deliberately, Eliza placed the check back on the desk. "I don't want his money," Eliza said. Her voice was quiet, but it didn't shake. "I worked for my wages. I won't be paid for my silence." "Don't be a fool," Sylvia hissed, her mask slipping. "You're being evicted. I know everything about you." "Then you know I have nothing left to lose," Eliza replied. She turned and walked out of the office. She didn't look back at the money. She walked to the employee locker room in the basement. She stripped off the oversized gray uniform, the invisibility cloak she had worn for so long, and put on her own threadbare jeans and sweater. She placed her badge on the bench. As she walked out of the service entrance, the rain began again. It was a cold, washing rain that soaked her instantly. She walked around the side of the building, toward the subway, but her gaze drifted upward, drawn against her will to the 40th floor. The lights were on, and there, standing in the window, looking down at the street, was a silhouette. Nolan. He was looking down, watching the ants scurry below. He couldn't see her. She was just a speck in the darkness, obscured by the rain and the distance. But she saw him. She saw the man she thought had seen her soul, now standing high above in his glass castle, protected by his wealth and his silence. She realized then that the check wasn't an apology. It was a wall. He had built it to keep her out, to protect himself from the messy, complicated reality of caring for someone who didn't fit into his spreadsheet. Eliza turned her back on the tower. A single sob escaped her throat, a jagged sound of pure grief, but the wind swallowed it instantly. She walked into the dark, wet city, homeless, jobless, and heartbroken. The game was over. The White Knight hadn't saved the Queen, he had traded her for safety. And as the distance between them grew with every step, Eliza knew that the girl who worked nights had finally woken up from the dream, only to find that the nightmare of her reality was colder than she remembered. The morning of the merger announcement, the Stratford Tower was a cathedral of noise. Phones rang incessantly, champagne corks popped in anticipation, and the board members buzzed with the frenetic energy of vultures circling a feast. But inside the executive suite, Nolan Stratford sat in a deafening silence. The chessboard on the side table remained frozen, the pieces standing like soldiers on a forgotten battlefield. It had been 3 days since Eliza had moved a piece. 3 days since the tower felt like a home and returned to being a cage. Nolan stared at the White Queen, isolated on the board, feeling a gnawing unease in his gut that he couldn't drown out with scotch or work. He pressed the intercom button. "Sylvia," he said, his voice ragged. "Where is the night staff? The cleaning crew?" Sylvia's voice crackled back, smooth and dismissive. "They're on rotation, Nolan. Focus on the Tokyo feed. We go live in 10 minutes. But Nolan couldn't focus. He stood up, driven by an instinct he had ignored for too long. He walked out of his office, bypassing the assistants, and headed straight for Sylvia's office down the hall. It was empty. He didn't know what he was looking for until he saw it. On the corner of her desk, buried under a stack of congratulatory cards, was a familiar envelope torn open. Nolan picked it up. He pulled out the check, the one Eliza had refused. He saw the amount, and then he saw the termination notice attached to it. His eyes scanned the legal jargon, the cold dismissal of a security risk, and finally the signature at the bottom. Nolan Stratford. The room spun. He remembered signing a stack of documents Sylvia had thrust at him on Thursday morning. He had signed them with the mechanical detachment of a man who had stopped caring about the details of his own life. We create our own monsters when we choose to close our eyes. He hadn't just neglected Eliza, he had unknowingly authorized her execution. "Nolan!" Sylvia appeared in the doorway, breathless and annoyed. "The cameras are rolling. What are you doing?" Nolan looked up, holding the termination notice, his knuckles white. "You put this in the stack," he whispered, his voice trembling with a quiet, terrifying fury. "You made me fire her." Sylvia snapped back, closing the door. "I handled a problem. She was a liability. She refused the money, by the way. Foolish girl. Now, put that down and come fix your tie." Nolan looked at the woman who had managed his life since his wife died. He looked at the tower he had built to keep the world out. And then he thought of Eliza. "I'm not fixing my tie," Nolan said. He dropped the paper. It fluttered to the floor, landing between them like a gauntlet. "Nolan, you can't leave," Sylvia warned, panic rising in her voice. "The merger is a game I'm tired of playing," Nolan finished as he walked past her. He walked past the board members, past the cameras, and into the elevator. He didn't stop at the lobby. He went out into the street, into the blinding gray afternoon of Chicago. He had no coat. He had no security detail. He only had the address he had memorized from the personnel file on Sylvia's desk. It took him an hour to find her. She wasn't at the apartment. The landlord had already changed the locks. He found her 3 blocks away, sitting in a 24-hour laundromat, the only place warm enough to wait out the cold without paying a cover charge. Eliza was sitting on a plastic chair, her knees pulled to her chest, watching the clothes spin in a dryer she hadn't paid for. When the footsteps stopped directly in front of her, heavy, expensive leather shoes on cheap linoleum, she froze. She raised her eyes. Nolan stood there. He looked out of place, a piece of the skyline fallen to the pavement, breathing hard, his hair wind-blown. "You signed it," Eliza said. Her voice was flat, dead. "I didn't read it," Nolan rasped. He fell to his knees in front of her, ignoring the dirt on the floor, ignoring the startled looks of the other patrons. "I signed 100 papers that morning. I didn't know one of them was you." Eliza's eyes welled with tears. "Does it matter? You built a world where you don't have to look at what you destroy. That's who you are, Nolan. You're the man in the tower." "I was," Nolan admitted, the confession tearing out of him. "I was a ghost haunting my own life. But then you moved the night." He reached out, his hand hovering near her knee. "You woke me up, Eliza. And when I found out you were gone, the silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It was a tomb." "I have nothing," Eliza whispered, her voice breaking. "I am homeless, Nolan. I am tired. I can't play chess with you anymore. I'm just trying to survive." "I don't want to play chess," Nolan said. "I want to surrender." He reached into his pocket. He didn't pull out a checkbook. He pulled out the white knight, the marble chess piece from his set. He placed it in her hand. It was cold, heavy and solid. "I resigned," Nolan said. Eliza stared at him. "What?" "I walked out of the merger," he said, his eyes locking onto hers. "I left Sylvia with the sharks." Eliza gasped. "You lost your company?" "I lost my handcuffs," Nolan corrected her, his voice firm but gentle. "They took the company, but they couldn't take my personal trust. I have enough put away to never wear a suit again. I can offer you a quiet life, Eliza. A real life. But I don't know how to do it alone." He looked at her, stripped of his power, offering her the only piece of the game that mattered. "I am asking for a second chance. Not as your boss. Not as a billionaire. Just as the man who wants to know what happens next in the game." Eliza looked at the knight in her palm, then at the man kneeling on the linoleum. She saw the truth in his eyes. "You're a fool," she said, a small, watery smile breaking through her pain. "I know," Nolan agreed, letting out a breath he had been holding for years. "But I'm your fool, if you'll have me." The sun rose over Lake Michigan, painting the turbulent water in shades of bruised purple and gold. It was a cold, biting dawn, the kind that separates the dreamers from the survivors. Nolan and Eliza sat on a weathered concrete bench facing the water, their backs to the skyline that Nolan had once owned. The wind whipped Eliza's hair across her face, but she didn't pull her coat tighter. For the first time in months, she felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the temperature. Nolan held a styrofoam cup of coffee, staring out at the horizon. He looked nothing like the CEO of the Stratford Tower. The wind had tousled his hair, and his eyes, usually hard and assessing, were soft with a terrifying vulnerability. "Do you regret it?" Eliza asked, her voice quiet against the roar of the waves. She held the white knight chess piece in her pocket, her fingers tracing the cold marble curves. Nolan took a slow sip of the coffee. He turned to look at the distant silhouette of the Stratford Tower, rising like a needle of glass against the morning sky. From down here, amidst the runners and the early commuters, it looked small, insignificant. "Regret is a luxury for men who have options," Nolan said, a faint smile touching his lips. "I didn't have an option, Eliza. Staying in that office, signing those papers, it was a slow death. I was suffocating in 500 thread count sheets. He turned his gaze to her, and the intensity of it made her breath hitch. Walking out of that boardroom was the first breath of air I've taken since my wife died. I don't regret the fall. I only regret that it took me so long to jump. Eliza looked at him, searching for the catch. But she saw only the raw, unvarnished truth of a man who had traded a kingdom for a conscience. "I'm still being evicted," she reminded him, grounding them in reality. "And you, the papers are going to destroy you. They'll say you lost your mind." "Let them," Nolan shrugged, shifting on the bench to face her fully. "Let them write their headlines. I'm done with skylines, Eliza. I want a skyline of trees now. I can buy us a small place, somewhere with a garden, somewhere with a porch where we can play chess in the sunlight, not the dark." He reached out and took her hand. His grip was firm, warm, and real. "I need you to understand something, Eliza," Nolan said, his voice dropping to a serious tone. "I didn't come to rescue you. I came because you were the only one who knew the rules of the game I actually wanted to play. You saw the opening when I only saw the wall." Eliza pulled the white knight from her pocket. She placed it on the bench between them. It stood there, stark white against the gray concrete, a symbol of sacrifice and strategy. "You sacrificed the knight," she whispered. "To save the queen," Nolan finished. He picked up the piece and placed it gently in her palm, closing her fingers over it. "You are my second chance, Eliza. Not at business, not at power, but at life. You are the second chance to get it right." The tears that Eliza had been holding back finally spilled over. They weren't tears of grief, they were tears of release. She realized that she wasn't just a girl who worked nights anymore. She was the woman who had woken the king. The night does not hide the truth. It simply waits for the noise to stop so we can finally hear it. For so long, she had believed the night was her hiding place, but it was in the silence that the truth had finally been heard. "I don't know how to be seen," Eliza admitted, her voice trembling. "I've spent my whole life trying to disappear." "Then we will learn together," Nolan promised. "I need to learn how to be small, and you need to learn how to be big. We'll meet in the middle." He leaned in, and under the pale, indifferent sky of a Chicago morning, he kissed her. It wasn't the desperate, stolen kiss of a movie climax. It was a slow, deliberate seal on a new contract, one written in trust and shared silence. As they pulled apart, the city began to wake up around them. Sirens wailed, cars honked, but for the first time, the noise didn't matter. Nolan stood up and offered his hand. She took it, leaving the ghost of her old life on the bench. They turned their backs on the tower, walking toward the subway, toward the messy, uncertain, beautiful chaos of a real life. He had spent a lifetime climbing to the top of the world to look down on it, never realizing that the only view worth having was found in the eyes of the girl who looked up when everyone else looked away.